Are you ready for this? It's a brand new electric car from a manufacturer we've not seen in the UK before, unless you happen to be very into electric buses. It's the BYD ATTO 3. Now, new stuff always excites us here at electrifying.com because new stuff means more choice, but you never get a second chance to make your first impression. So what's yours? Let us know what you think in the comments. And please do remember to like and subscribe because that's how I get paid. Now, there's a lot to talk about because the ATTO 3 is from a Chinese car maker, BYD, which is just entering the UK market. Now, BYD stands for Build Your Dreams, which sounds a little bit cheesy to me. But the ATTO 3 itself is anything but, because it hits all of the right markers. It's a 5-seat, mid-sized SUV with 261 miles of WLTP range. And it's kind of in the middle of everything. It's quite obviously gunning for things like VW's ID3, the Cupra Born, maybe even the Kia Niro EV. So it's right in the middle. What we've come to figure out, really, is whether these Build Your Dreams will turn into nightmares. Sorry, I couldn't resist that one. Okay, I know there are a lot of sort of 5-seat, mid-sized SUVs out there on the electric market at the moment, but there's good reason for that. They're a good solid base for most people's family lives. They cover a lot of bases. And the idea with the ATTO 3 is probably to not put off those more conservative customers. That's why this car isn't that crazy. Or is it?
So let's drink this in. BYD says that the ATTO 3 has a face that is, and I quote, inspired by ancient dragons. So these swept-back LED headlights over a blanked-off grille and horizontal bar are supposed to resemble the eyes and moustache of a dragon.
Do you see it? Now, apparently, it's very aerodynamic, but a quick check reveals it to only be as slippery as something like a Hyundai Kona, and actually less slippery than a VW ID4, so kind of middle of the pack, really. And then, on the rest of the face, it's kind of a little bit anodyne. It's got some sort of big fake vents down here, and it gives it a nice enough face. Still doesn't look like an actual dragon, though.
The side view is fine. The 18-inch wheels look decent, and there's some chrome trim around the windows and on the rear pillar that add a bit of jazziness. But it's not that memorable. One thing that makes me wince, the charge port slightly chops into the wheel arch. But it does come in 5 metallic colours, which is excellent.
And then at the back, like on the front, you've got another full-width light bar and these silver trim pieces on the C-pillar, both of which remind me of Volkswagen Group cars like the ID4 and the Cupra Born. A little bit strange that. It's kind of taking inspiration from other cars. Then the bit that kind of makes me sort of stutter a bit, it says Build Your Dreams right across the back, spelled out, which kind of reminds me of inspirational quotes that you pin to the fridge door. After that, it's kind of nice enough, but it doesn't really break the mould.
Tell us what you think in the comments. Is conservative the right way to go, or should BYD have been a bit more out there?
But you know where the BYD ATTO 3 gets a bit more out there? In here. Because it feels like BYD saved up all the crazy and put it on the inside. So much so, I'm not really sure where I'm going to start, and that must be a first for me. I mean, you get in, the first thing that hits you is this kind of rib dash and door panel, which I'm not sure what to think about. And then after that, you sort of look at the dash and it looks like it's melted down onto the lower portion. But then you start thinking, parts of this are actually quite familiar. And do you know why? Because all of this is apparently inspired by a gym. Let me point a few things out. So these air vents here are supposed to be free weights, resemble dumbbells, which is very interesting. Then on this frankly crazy door card, this is supposed to be a barbell. Then the gear selector, which reminds me of the kind of throttles from an aircraft, that's supposed to be a kettlebell. And even this centre divider top is supposed to be like a treadmill. Now, while I applaud the fact that it's different, it does feel a little bit mad. What do you think? Would you like your car interior to resemble a gym? Let me know in the comments. Then, after that, it gets a little bit more normal. So once you've got past all the kind of crazy shapes, there's a small driver information screen in front of me here, a steering wheel with some decent buttons on, both roller and clicky and normal buttons, and then a couple of stalks. And then on this design trim, which is the top spec, there are 2 others, Active and Comfort. This one gets a 15 point something inch screen, which is quite big. On the two lower grades, you get a 12-inch screen, and it's got a neat trick. So obviously, this looks normal, that's fine, but if I press this button here, you can switch it from landscape to portrait. Now, the company thinks that the portrait screen is better for sat-nav, and the landscape stuff is better for music. I just like it because it's a nice little gadget. I'm not sure how much you'd actually switch it around, but it is like one of Ginny's favourite cars, the Fisker Ocean, so it's a nice little touch. One of the things it also does is it has a load of ambient lighting in here, and if you sync it, it will pulse in time with the music you're playing. I'm going to call gimmick on that one. After that, all of the cars get these multicolour fake leather sport seats, which is nice. They all get a full length opening sunroof, which makes the interior actually quite light. And it does feel quite well equipped, though it can feel a bit play schooly, like everything's big and chunky and funny shapes. So it feels a bit almost childlike. Now that's quite attractive in some situations, but I don't know whether it would wear on me after a bit. Especially one thing. I find these doors quite bonkers. First of all, the door handle is kind of a pullback thing. Here, look. And that's on top of a speaker. But then down here, it has what BYD calls guitar strings.
Say that again?
If you say the phrase BYD, it keeps activating the voice control, which is another feature that it always has. Cancel. Anyway, I was...
Still listening.
She's still listening. Cancel. Shush now. Stop it. She's gone away. And that's because I've stopped talking. What I was going to say was, when you've got used to the door handle, you realise that down here on the door pockets are strings. Now, it basically looks like a rubbish ukulele, and it's supposed to hold things in the door pocket, but they go straight across the speakers. Now, I'm not sure how good that is for audio quality, but I'm guessing not good. Is this too much? Let us know.
There will be 3 grades: active, comfort and design, and there's a good spread of kit on this design spec car: heated electric seats, heated electric mirrors, sat-nav, over-the-air updates, CarPlay and Android Auto. Non-leather leather in 2-tone shades, loads of driver assistance systems. It does feel like you get a lot of toys. Obviously the lower grades get less fun stuff, but a quick flick through the specs reveals that they're pretty well equipped across the board, although the 2 lower grades do get the smaller main screen. All cars get a heat pump and everything gets an electric tailgate and a big panoramic roof.
But actually, when you start poking around, although there are a lot of different textures, like look at this, there's sort of a grainy black plastic here, smooth black plastic here, silver, blue, and then smooth plastic, and then down here it's a different blue of the vents, which has got a grey thing, and then some silver, and then red stitching. There's a lot going on. But some of it feels really nice. I particularly like the gear selector. I think that feels really nice. And then down here, you've got a wireless charging pad on this grade, along with some physical buttons for off-use functions. So the stuff for the driving modes, the aircon, the handbrake, stuff like that. It's one of those cars that's a little bit overwhelming when you first get in it. It feels a little bit play school, but compared to other cars in this sector, it has definitely got character. And that's really important because in here is where you spend most of your time. It's what you're looking at. And then as far as storage goes, it's an electric car with a flat floor. So it's got a big storage bin down here with some charge points that you can see down here. And then there's another big sort of deep covered bin here underneath the little treadmill inspired top cover. Decent glove box, and that's about it. It's good enough.
It's also spacious. Plenty of room in the back and a big boot at 440 litres.
Which includes this double floor, and then even so there's a handy underfloor storage for cables. There's a standard electric tailgate, and you get a lot more space if you fold the split rear seats forward. It's a nicely spacious thing. Actually, I've got a good anecdote about the name. An attosecond is 1/quintillionth of a second, and scientists haven't actually been able to measure it yet. So because scientists are always trying to set new standards of measurement, that's what Build Your Dreams thought this should be called, because an atto is something that is always setting new standards. And the 3 part is because it's based on a new platform that's 3.0. So it's the Atto 3, 1/quintillionth of a second, which is very fast. That's my attention span. Now, it's a funny thing, but a lot of EVs in this price range and size seem to have exactly the same amount of power and torque. It's like they've all got together and figured out what the optimum would be, and the Atto 3 is no different. So it basically gets just over 200 brake horsepower and will do 0 to 62 miles an hour, the usual sprint, in about 7.3 seconds. I have to say though, I don't think it's that fast. You can change the modes from this little rocker switch down here, and there's Eco, Sport and Normal. And even though Eco feels like it's been injected with temazepam and it's completely slowed down, Sport doesn't seem that much more than Normal. And I don't think it's doing 0 to 62 in under 7.5 seconds. Just feels quite... It's good. Look, there's an acceleration. It's just not particularly urgent. This isn't an urgent car. It's quite sedate, really, which is not a problem. You know, you don't want everything to be neck snapping. The other thing is the ride is okay. So it's perfectly acceptable. Handles big bumps quite well. It's not too nibbly. But one place that the Atto 3 really seems to struggle for me is in the steering. Now, it's got fairly good body control, but the relationship between what happens when you turn the wheel and what happens to the front wheels is ever so slightly off. Strangely, on a motorway or on an A road, that makes this quite a relaxing car to drive because it doesn't react to every input. So you could sneeze, look away, do whatever, and the Atto 3 would just still track fairly straight. But when you're going around any kind of corner like a roundabout, you feel like you've already turned the wheel a bit before it actually turns. That's quite disconcerting. It's not my favourite thing about the car, if I'm honest. There's also brake regeneration, which frankly is not strong enough. Certainly isn't a one-pedal car. It's one of those weird cars where I absolutely don't mind it, but it doesn't blow your mind in any way. And it also likes to beep quite a bit. So I was driving down this road earlier and a car pulled into a right-hand turn lane in front of me, and the BYD had a little Mardy because it thought I was just going to drive straight into him. Interesting take on safety systems when they just misread situations. But I have noticed that it will do a little bit of tyre scrabble and torque steer when you're pulling out of a junction, but that's quite common with a lot of electric cars. I just thought we'd started to move past that. That's where it feels a little bit unresolved. But overall, I think the Atto 3 is a really good effort. It's a solid effort. No one would be offended driving this car. I just think that the finesse and the absolute precision isn't quite there in this 5-seat SUV, which sounds like a stupid thing to say. It's good, it's just not brilliant.
Like I mentioned right at the start, the Atto 3 gets a WLTP range of 261 miles from a battery pack that can accept just over 60 kilowatt hours of juice. So a bit less than the long-range MG ZS and a bit more than the more expensive small battery VW ID4. Absolutely workable, but nothing special. But what it does have is a really interesting battery. It's called a blade battery and what BYD calls an 8-in-1 system. So it includes everything to do with controlling the battery in one slimmed down space, from the transmission to the charging system to the vehicle control unit. That gives excellent efficiency, and the battery itself is a lithium iron-phosphate unit, or LFP, rather than the more usual lithium-ion. It doesn't contain any cobalt or heavy metals, which is contentious, and it's safer and more durable. It's also got an industry-first direct battery heating and cooling system, plus a standard fit heat pump, which BYD reckons could save you 20% of range in really cold weather. That's all really good stuff. Interestingly, the Atto 3 is based on a skeleton called E-Platform 3, which can actually be fitted with lots of different bits of hardware. So front, rear or four-wheel drive, and even 800-volt charging systems like our favourite Hyundais and Kias, and much more expensive cars like the Porsche Taycan or Audi e-tron GT.
Unfortunately, the Atto 3 doesn't get that, and with a peak charging rate of just 88 kilowatts DC, although it's quite solid across the charge curve, it means that it will take about 44 minutes to charge from 10 to 80%, which basically feels a bit slow these days.
BYD quotes a fast charge time of 29 minutes on a big enough charger, but that's from 30 to 80%, so not quite the same figures we're used to. There's a standard 7 kilowatt AC charging ability on the lowest active grade, or 11 kilowatts on the more expensive versions, and it'll take about 9 hours 45 minutes to charge on a home wall box. So you're getting some next generation battery tech, but you might not notice the difference.
One of the good things about the ATTO 3 though is that it does seem to cover quite a lot of bases. It comes as standard with vehicle to load charging, and it's powerful enough to potentially charge another electric car. It's also got a 5-star Euro Enyaq safety rating, which is really important thanks to that clever design. It can't tow though, which I know is important to some of you. It also comes with an 8-year or 100,000 mile warranty on the Blade battery, or 4 years and 70,000 miles on the rest of the car, which is kind of up there but not stunning. So that is the Build Your Dreams ATTO 3. It's a good car with a frankly mad interior, but how much would you pay for it? Go on, have a guess. Well, I've got the price list here, and it says the lowest spec active grade is £36,490, which is fairly spenny, and then the comfort grade just £500 more than that, so £36,990. The bells and whistles design grade, like this one, that weighs in £2,000 more at £38,990. Now, if you think of something like an MG ZS long range, that comes in at £35,495, which is obviously a bit less, but it's still cheaper than a smaller battery ID4 Life in comfort grade. So the VW stuff tends to be a lot more expensive. Would I have one? Well, I'm not quite convinced yet. I think the ATTO 3 is a really interesting car with some brilliant tech, but it feels like BYD hasn't quite hit its stride just yet. This feels like just the beginning. In fact, BYD is going to bring several new models to the UK fairly soon, including the Han Saloon, which is really quite handsome, and the Tang 7-seat SUV. So, BYD, should it be on your list? Let us know what you think.
Is BYD a maker you might consider? Or would you stick to something more familiar? Well, if you're stuck, you should pop over and see us at electrifying.com, where we have all the information on the BYD and all of its competition like the MG ZS, VW ID4 and Kia Niro EV. If you want facts, we've got them.